Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's SIG webinar. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for the next hour. My name is Destiny Joel, and I'm the Manager of Global Events here at SIG. I have the pleasure of facilitating today's webinar entitled Advanced Category Management, How to Establish Building Blocks for Success, presented by our friends at Denali, a WNS company. Today's webinar is meant to be interactive, so please submit your questions throughout the presentation by typing them into the Q&A box on your WebEx screen. We'll do our best to answer all of the questions at the conclusion of the presentation, and we'll also be sharing a PDF copy of the slides at the end of the webinar. Before I proceed, I have just a few housekeeping and calendar items. Quickly, I'd like to cover some of the resources we provide here at SIG. As you know, SIG hosts events all over the globe, so please check the SIG website frequently for upcoming cities and current agenda. SIG hosts weekly webinars. You know this because you're on a webinar right now. Visit our website for a complete listing of upcoming webinars and register today. SIG's peer-to-peer resource. This is an opportunity to ask top-of-mind questions for instant responses. These inquiries go out on Tuesday and Wednesday, and you do not have to be a SIG member to respond. Next, over 5,000 tools, templates, white papers, presentations, and research documents. It is a treasure trove of resources that will make your job easier every single day. Our career network is where you'll find job postings and internship opportunities for all levels of employment. And last, but certainly not least, we have our Student Talent Outreach Program. This program was designed to find tomorrow's supply chain professionals today while students are still learning about the industry. Please reach out to me directly if you have any questions or would like more information about any of these programs. And next, we are so excited to announce that we have established strategic partnerships with Bureau, HFS Research, Art of Procurement, and a couple of other people that we're not able to tell you about at this time. So please reach out to a SIG member for more information about how these partnerships will benefit you as a SIG member. SIG's Global Executive Summits are semi-annual events with more than 350 decision makers in attendance. We pack the week with keynote and breakout sessions as well as tons of networking opportunities. The agenda and event details for our Spring Summit in Washington, D.C. are available on our website, and registration is currently open. We're gaining more of a global footprint here at SIG, so please take a look at some of the upcoming events on the SIG website under the Networking Events tab. If you have colleagues in any of these cities, please invite them to attend. SIG University was launched in 2016 and offers training and development opportunities to people of all levels in their sourcing careers. We're currently enrolling for the next Certified Sourcing Professional and newly launched Certified Supplier Management Professional course, both starting on January 29th. SIG recently launched a new individual membership program. This program allows you to maintain your SIG membership no matter where your career takes you, and you'll still have the ability to utilize our membership resources like the SRC and attending our networking events. Visit sig.org/membership to learn more about the individual membership program. And now, for the reason you're all gathered here today. Today's webinar is brought to you by Denali, a WNS company, and the title of today's presentation, Blocks for Success. It is with great pleasure that I get to introduce you to today's presenter, Lynn Rideout. Lynn is a director at WNS Denali. She's focused on developing and continuously improving client competencies within category management, driving toward client success and achieving sustainable, optimized procurement value creation that is tied to the organization's business objectives. Lynn is an experienced procurement services professional with over 17 years experience, including roles within the procurement management, marketing category management, sourcing and procurement services operations leadership. Prior to joining WNS Denali, Lynn spent 4 years at Accenture, where her primary roles included North American Lead for Marketing and Regional Category Management Director. Prior to Accenture, Lynn spent over 10 years at Ariba, formerly Free Markets. Lynn holds a bachelor's degree in political science and business from Grove City College and a master's degree in international affairs from the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. She lives just south of Pittsburgh with her husband and triplet daughters. Lynn, we are all looking forward to your presentation today, and with that, the mic and control are all yours.
Great, thank you so much, Destiny, and thank you all for joining today. I'm super excited to bring this topic to you today. I think the notion of category management is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and I'm looking forward to today's discussion. As Destiny mentioned, please feel free to make this interactive, so ask questions throughout, and I'll be happy to take them, and we'll go through some of the key building blocks today as we get started. So without further ado, I thought it was good to start with just taking a little bit of a step back and talking about what is category management. And I think oftentimes when I'm in conversations with people, I quickly realize we might have different perceptions of what that is. For some people, it's a step you do at the start of a sourcing project. For other people, it's a thing that you once had to do to come up with a category plan, and then you put it in a drawer and never thought about it again. But there's a wide range of definitions around category management. So what we're going to do today is we're going to first try to align on what we're talking about today and how we think about category management, so that we're all a little bit level set on what it is. But again, you can see some of the definitions here, but I thought we'd start with a little bit of a polling question to get from all of you how you think about category management today, just to level set before we get started. So the first polling question, how do you think about category management today? A, it's an important step to do at the start of a strategic sourcing project. B, I've heard of it, but I'm not really sure yet what it means. C, it shapes the way that we do everything within procurement in alignment with the business. D, it is a presentation to document the procurement actions for a category. So if you could just take a moment and answer the polling question with what kind of best aligns with your thought on category management, that would be great.
All right, folks, so we do have that poll up in the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen there. So if you'll select your answer, we'll have those results here in just a few more moments. Now, Lynn, what have you seen in the past, or what do you think the audience's results might show?
I hope that there's a lot of letter C, that it's currently the way people are doing things. But even sometimes when we think that, it can still be a little bit more like A or D. So I'll be curious. I don't know.
All right.
I'm hoping for lots of C's.
Up in a few more seconds. Just a few more seconds, and we'll have those results up on screen. And it looks like you were right, Lynn.
Excellent. We're off to a good start. So hopefully for a lot of you, you do think about it as the way that you do procurement, and it's in line with the business. But just to make sure, we're going to talk about, for today's session and as we think about category management, just how do we really think about it. So you can see on the slide a little bit of a graphic. I think most importantly, it's not just a procurement thing when we talk about category management. It's really a business thing. So, if procurement says they do category management on their own, but it's not really completely aligned with the business, and it's not completely aligned with what the business objectives are, it's not really true category management. So it's first and foremost looking at a category level view in alignment with the business. So it's not a plan that procurement puts together without business engagement. It's something that's very collaborative with the business, and we think, front of mind with what keeps the business awake at night, and how does the business prioritize what they want to see happening within IT or within marketing or whatever the category might be. And then you can see a few of the steps that fall into category management. It really is a combination, not sequential, but together, of really understanding your internal business, really understanding then how the market plays into that and how it influences it, and how to think about making the market dimensions a real piece of your category plan, and then prioritizing all of those insights that you've thought about within the business, outside of the business, to really come up with a holistic plan. And that plan isn't just focused on sourcing, it's focused on the entire procurement process. It's focused on how do we make sure we minimize our risk when it comes to what's under contract and what's not under contract, or how do we really think about our top suppliers and how we should be effectively managing them. So that plan really runs throughout the procurement life cycle. It really becomes a deliberate way that we do everything in alignment with the business throughout the life cycle of the category. And I think the other piece to think about is it starts to think about the category as a multi-year a multi-year journey. What's my vision for this category in 3 years? So what should I be doing today to really drive momentum? And all of that should lead to proactive execution. So it's not, it's not a case of, gosh, I had no idea that project was coming up and now I have to react to it and that wasn't part of my plan. It becomes much more an ability to anticipate needs, anticipate what the business is going to care about, and get in front of it in the most effective way possible. And, it takes a lot of work to do category management well, so it begs the question, why would I do all of this? Why put all this time and effort into category management? And I think probably for all of you who checked C, hopefully this is very real to you, because it drives results. It drives increased spend under management. It drives increased savings. It really helps to get us in front of reducing our risk. So, I think I've oftentimes talked to people who do kind of the same thing over and over again and expect different or better results. So every 3 years I source the same thing and I always want to make sure I get 10% savings. And gosh, I don't know why that's not working anymore. And oh, by the way, my business is also asking me for increased savings, so that 10% now needs to be 12% or 15% or higher. And they're also asking me to think about my risk and take a bigger role in that. So, you start to pile on some of those symptoms and some of those facets, and it really becomes, gosh, we need a new way of doing things. We need an enhanced way of doing things, and we have to think about more than just the project we have in front of us. We have to think about driving momentum at the category level by really getting in front of demand, by really getting in front of what the needs are truly going to be. So you see, when really, really effective category management's in place, the savings potential is significant. I know that's quite a wide range. I think category by category and based on maturity, which we're going to talk about, that percentage can vary, but it's developing a mindset that drives these incremental results and getting out of the routine of, strategically sourcing it every 2 to 3 years when it comes up for renegotiation, or, just putting the right pricing in place right before the contract gets signed. So, we do the work because it's interesting work to us. It makes our jobs and our role more rich and interesting, but it also drives results for the business and drives bottom line in a pretty powerful way. So there's a very big reason why we do this. And I think then it turns to, what do we have to do? When we talk about category management, and it sounds like many of you are already on this journey, but what are the pieces that we have to think about? Is it just put a plan in place and we're good to go? And I beg the question that it's really a lot of different dimensions that come into really doing effective category management and doing it well. There are 3 pieces that I'll hit on. It's thinking about direction setting, thinking about the work processes, and thinking about the strong enablers that you need to make it all work. I think that you see some of the key questions that we have here, but when we look at direction setting, for example, it's asking big questions like, where do I want to be in 3 years? What should I be focused on within my role? How quickly can I make change occur? And how do I sustain that change? So some pretty big questions, and it's setting a vision for your category and really using that to drive some of the projects you're going to do today, the strategies that you might try to put in place, and again, in complete alignment with the business. So that involves a lot of change. It involves things like category councils, perhaps, to make sure you're effectively ongoing managing that category in alignment with the business. So it's thinking about your direction setting and making sure it's clear to you where the business wants the category to go, and that then the priorities and the strategies line up with that. So for example, if you're part of an organization that wants to shift to being more focused on using the cloud for IT needs, having a plan in place where you're buying the same server specs and same number of servers and same server space that you did the last 3 years is probably no longer going to be a relevant strategy. So it's getting in front of, we're having a shift and we need to think about what some of those pieces are and then drive the activities after that. From a work process perspective, obviously we're talking about category management today. All of the sourcing, the contracting, Some of the when do I put a supplier on a catalog and so on should come from, a strong category plan as you move down the path of category management. So it's things like I have visibility into my project pipeline sooner and for a much longer projected period of time looking out into the future. It's increasing the portfolio. I'm now not only sourcing my digital advertising spend, but I'm also helping to develop processes to make that spend more effective. I am also thinking about, making sure I'm driving compliance to the right agencies that should be used and so on. So it's really thinking about, that portfolio holistically and not just kind of sourcing by sourcing project or contract by contract. And then it's driving, consistent messages so that, the relationship with the stakeholders is improving and deepening, and they're looking to procurement more and more to be a seat at the table and to be a key partner in the category itself. And all of that is very hard to do without the right enablers. So it's thinking about things like, is our data good? Is it credible? If it's not credible, how do I find ways to make it good enough that I can act on it and I can include it in my plan? What are the right pieces to really depict and illustrate in my spend data when I'm doing a category plan? How important is geography? How important is, my individual subcategory and how it behaves? How important are some of the various, different business units that make up this category spend? So it's thinking about the internal spend data and making that as real and credible as possible and validating that data so you're not using bad data to drive decisions. It's also thinking about market intelligence. What's my plan to make sure that I have the right level of knowledge about my external market, to make sure that I have the right level of knowledge about, what's going on in the market. And then things like technology. Do I have the right technology to help enable this to be more efficient, to help it be, something that I'm capturing and come back to, time and again and see. And all of that, drives our individual competencies and performance. What skills am I learning and building to be better at, category management, to be a better category manager to my business? How do I increase my stakeholder relationship skills? How do I get better and better at analyzing my spend data in an effective way? So these are a lot of different factors, and it can feel sometimes when people are earlier in the journey, it can feel very overwhelming. There's a lot of pieces to consider. There's a lot of parts of category management. So, it sometimes gets a little overwhelming when people are starting off going, I don't know how I'm ever going to do all of this or how I'm going to think about it. So we found a way to boil it down to really three key things, and we call them the category management imperatives. So fundamentally, as you think about it, and it may feel a little bit overwhelming, it's coming back to these three things as kind of the, if I'm focused on nothing else, this is what I should be focused on. And it's hopefully fairly intuitive to everyone on the call today, but it's knowing your stakeholders and knowing them well, spending time with them, really understanding their needs, driving that real alignment, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, and bringing new opportunities to the table over time. Hey, have you considered this? Or I've talked to some peers, and here's something that other organizations are doing. So just really knowing them in a deep way and growing that over time is the first imperative. The second one is understanding your categories, both from an internal data and just spending time with it and understanding what we're buying and how we're buying it and where it's going, but also just, going to networking events or having a network connection and going to conferences and having the right subscriptions where, where applicable, or just spending the right time reading, some of even the free information that's available on your category, and just spending time, thinking about your category is really the second imperative, and that will grow over time. You don't necessarily need to be an expert on day one, but having a plan to grow that knowledge is important. And then obviously delivering results. I think it's really important to talk about this because a great plan that sits in a desk drawer isn't doing anyone any good and isn't very meaningful. So it's actually taking that plan, translating it down to a portfolio of specific activities. As a result of my plan, these are the things we're going to get done. Here's the prioritization. Here are the resources I need. Here's when I think I'm going to get it done. Really understanding, how that translates to actual benefit for the organization and activities that are going to be done is really important. So, if you remember nothing else about today's topic, just thinking about these 3 imperatives and thinking about ways that you're growing in each of these areas, or you're deepening your knowledge of your category, for example, or deepening a relationship with a stakeholder, I think is always a good best practice, whether you're yet ready as an organization to make that leap into category management, or you already are and just need a little bit of a refresher. You know, these imperatives hopefully will serve you well. And so today's topic is about the building blocks. So hopefully we've laid a little bit of the groundwork down around what it is and all of the different things that you have to think about. And we've broken it down into these imperatives. But I think it's also useful to just break it down into some of the individual things that you're going to think about, some of the enablers to help you as a category manager or as someone who's looking to employ some of these practices. So there's really 6 things that we're going to talk about today. That doesn't mean that these are the only 6 things that you'll bring into your role in category management or that will come into play. And it doesn't mean that there's not a little bit of synergy and overlap between them, but we tried to break it down into building blocks. And we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about these building blocks and talking about within each of these building blocks just the maturity factor of each. We think about category management as a journey, and we think about the fact that you have to start somewhere. So, in each of these building blocks, you may be at a very different spot. You may be really mature. You could give a TED Talk on how to do spend analytics, and you've got all the right tools, and you've been doing it for years, and you're cutting edge, and that's great. But somewhere else, for example, methodology and tools, you may have no standard way of doing a category plan, for example, and you might be on the lower maturity end of that. So just really assessing where you are today and what step change can look like in any of these areas is really what we're going to focus on to in this hour, give a sense of what the building blocks are, or at least some of them, to take away with you from a category management standpoint. So you can see them here. It's stakeholder collaboration, methodology and tools, category knowledge, execution support, having a multi-year portfolio, and spend analytics. So what we're going to do next is really dive into each of those on its own for just a couple minutes and talk through that and talk through, again, the maturity curve or the maturity levels of each. So with that, we'll start with stakeholder collaboration. And you can see at the top, and you'll see this throughout the next number of slides, we really look at just kind of a brief snapshot of what maturity might look like. By no means, again, an exhaustive list of bullets. When we think about stakeholder collaboration, some of you on the call today, for some of your categories, may have really limited interaction with the stakeholders. They come to you when there's a project. It's a very reactive relationship to date. And the stakeholders really own the strategy around the category. And that might be, kind of the entry-level view of stakeholder collaboration. And you can see then all the way up to at level 5, gosh, we have a strategic partnership. Procurement is a trusted advisor. We're part of every major strategic conversation. We have joint innovation. We throw big ideas on the table. We could really be the poster child of synergy between procurement and the business. So that's really what the maturity range looks like, again, at a glance for stakeholder collaboration. Why is it important? I think it's really important because, oftentimes, procurement has historically operated in a bubble, and, procurement might have goals for a category that are totally different than the business goals for a category. And I think just starting by understanding that and then really starting to spend time talking to your stakeholders around where there's conflicts, where there's synergies, where goals might align and we never really realized, it starts to drive that collaborative spirit. And again, you have to start somewhere. And it's moving down that relationship path to the point where you really do have goals that are completely intertwined. The category procurement goals, the stakeholder goals are completely one and the same, and the category plan reflects that. And that's really the goal of stakeholder management. There are a lot of pieces that go into that in terms of, the right communication plan with your stakeholders, and what, kind of growing that relationship with them and what's important to them. But really, you're just trying to visually move down the path of the goals being aligned and starting to operate as one as you kind of go up through that maturity curve. So then moving on to, go back the slide, to methodology and tools is the next topic. And by no means are these in a a particular order, but I just want to give a flavor of, again, some of the enablers and building blocks. Again, you see the maturity. When you talk about methodology and tools, I think it'll resonate with some of you that at this point in time, you may not have, category management tools and templates. There may not be a set way that one person does a category plan compared to someone else. It may be very much kind of on a case-by-case basis, and again, it may be still that we're just thinking at a project level and not necessarily at a category level. And you see all the way up to, at a high level of maturity, we might have a globally consistent model. We have category plans covering nearly all of our spend. We have an ongoing category governance methodology with supporting tools and templates and mindset, and that's kind of the highest end of maturity, and many people are somewhere in between. And it's thinking about, again, that step change. What does it take to start moving down the steps, not to jump from level 1 to level 5, but to say, gosh, I might be at level 2 right now. How do I get to level 3? How do I have a common approach? How do I have some more, kind of procurement brand awareness on the part of the stakeholders and so on? So it's just thinking very deliberately about what does it take to move down the maturity curve, and again, what are those building blocks that I should be thinking about? Why does methodology and tools matter? It's not, just another case of procurement coming up with a bunch of steps and a bunch of tools and templates to make life for the business hard. It's really actually about effectiveness and really hopefully driving efficiency for the business as well. If they start to get used to a consistent brand from procurement, if they start to recognize what a plan looks like from procurement and what are the pieces that go into it and what are the touch points and what does that drive, there's more awareness and recognition, and they start to realize that that procurement is changing the way that maybe historically they've done things in conjunction with stakeholders. So it's driving that brand recognition again, or that brand uptick from procurement. It's hopefully having consistent experiences so the stakeholders start to know that if they're working with one category manager versus another, that experience is going to be very similar because they're using some of the same tools, same approach, same mindset to drive those activities. And ultimately, it's making the planning as effective and efficient as possible. I can't tell you how many times I've seen really solid plans just missing a couple key pieces because it didn't really have a set of tools and templates and an overall methodology to follow. And so you see a lot of good ingredients there and a lot of good, thoughtful insight coming from it, but then you realize there's a glaring hole because there's no market assessment included, or it doesn't get to the point where there's a portfolio or a vision, and it kind of is losing something in the overall impact that it has. So it's, again, just making sure that that experience is consistent and high quality as possible and isn't missing something.
Lynn, we did have a question come in. Do we have a couple seconds
Sure.
to take a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the question is, when is it a good time to invest in market intelligence or category knowledge?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I would say it's always a good time to invest, but I'll put an asterisk around invest to say invest can oftentimes, I'm a big fan of exhausting free or lower cost market intelligence and category knowledge just all the time. So constantly reading about a category, constantly, kind of having your go-to websites that you're looking at or go-to sources, and don't underestimate the power of your personal network. So having people in your network that are your go-tos to go, gosh, I'm hearing this about the category, what are you hearing? Spending the extra 5 minutes talking to your supplier, and thinking about what their perspective is and putting all of that together to help kind of form a baseline of what your category knowledge is, I think is something you should always be doing and always be prioritizing. I think from there, as you start to become more and more familiar with your category, there are times where you make a very conscious decision to invest in a subscription, for example, or an index, if it's something, that ties to an index or something like that to further, just give credibility and that constant market intelligence. But I think that's kind of that next step after you formulate that foundation of this is how I'm going to get my information and who I'm going to talk to. And again, prioritizing things like conferences and things like that that keep you in the market and give you that rich experience.
Perfect. Thank you, Lynn.
Sure. Hopefully that answered the question. And good topic to go into. The next building block is category knowledge. So again, so many of us have been in a position where we're put in a new category area where it's I've done I don't know, I've been a raw materials buyer for a really long time, and now all of a sudden I'm buying corporate services, and one of my biggest categories is HR. What on earth do I do? Or at some level you're getting a new portfolio of categories. So many of us have had that case where we start at level 1. We start with really limited category knowledge. We might not yet have a peer network built up, and we might not really understand what our spend data is telling us and the insights around that. And you have to find a way to start going up through the levels to increase that category knowledge. At the other end, if you've been in your category for years and years and you have a great peer network and you have great sources of information and you have really solid relationships with your top suppliers, you really may be a category thought leader, and you really may be able to very easily apply category knowledge to each of the plans that you develop, and you really can think about that full procurement life cycle very intuitively. And again, many of us are somewhere in between, trying to intentionally grow our personal category knowledge. When we talk about category knowledge, I've alluded to this, but there are a number of different types. So don't assume it just comes from I have to have a subscription and I'm going to get all my knowledge from that. That is an important ingredient, but it's all of the other things that we've already talked about. It's the network, the supplier knowledge, it's project experience. What did I learn the last time I ran this project? Or what did my predecessor learn the last time they ran it, and how can I go find that? So it's thinking about all of the ways knowledge comes to us and our own personal experience. And honestly, I spend a lot of time talking to stakeholders, asking thoughtful questions as I get to build my relationship with them around their perspective of the category and what they understand about it. I've often found that stakeholders are much more appreciative if you just ask the question than if you pretend that you know it and aren't kind of coming up through that learning curve. So it's sometimes just asking the right question, but then it's not just taking category knowledge for the sake of category knowledge and putting it into a slide deck. It's really thinking through why this matters to our business or how does it apply to us. So, if you understand, at a general level that it's a buyer's market, it's really understanding what is my organization's actual buying power with respect to that. Are we a primary buyer, or are we really one of the little players in the market? So how does that actually adjust or change based on, my organization's story and what really is my profile as an organization and as an individual category manager. So it's thinking about things like Porter's 5 Forces and other tools that you can use to really take the market intelligence, take the category knowledge, and translate it to something that's real for your business, real for the category that you're looking at. So I can't emphasize that part enough, because I think a lot of times we just see, here's the market intelligence and here's what it tells us, and now I've popped it into my slide deck, and it may be that it's not really applicable to my industry or my particular organization. So that's category knowledge as a building block. Now turning the attention a little more inward to spend analytics, it's oftentimes the case that organizations will say, I can't really do a category plan because I don't really feel that my data is credible, or it's in so many different sources, I don't know where to find it, or I don't trust it, so I really just don't think this is for me, I can't do category management. And again, you have to start somewhere. So on one level, it may be, at a basic level, spend's located in multiple sources, it's not viewed as credible, it's not categorized, and it's kind of a mess. It may be sitting in desk drawers, it may be sitting, in filing cabinets and so on, all the way up to, at a top level of maturity. It may be that, we can do predictive spend analytics. We really can take what we've done in the past and look ahead to the future and predict what's going to happen with our spend, predict, what new things we might be spending today versus what we spent yesterday. We may have very high confidence in our data. It may be a leading class category hierarchy, and that we're just all, treating it as top-notch input. I definitely find most people are not at that top level, and they're somewhere, in the lower to medium levels of spend analytics. But again, it's making strides to work with what you have and translate that into something meaningful. I think it does a couple things. First of all, it just helps you understand your category scope. So what's in scope, what's not in scope, when I do my category plan, what makes sense to group together, and what makes sense to leave out for right now because it doesn't really behave the way the rest of the category does, and it's being able to depict that. And you can see a little illustration there around travel, meetings, and expense, and in a particular plan, what's in scope, what's future scope perhaps because it's something we'll work to develop later on, or it's just not part of this plan at this time. And then it's finding ways to leverage stakeholders, leverage the information you do have to extrapolate, and do the best you can to get to credible data that, again, is in alignment with the business. So it's not just the procurement view of this is what we spent last year, but it's validated with the right stakeholders saying, yep, I can agree to that, or gosh, I don't know about this supplier, we might want to think about that differently. And all of this goes to driving true insights, not just here's what we spend, that's the end, but what are some key observations around that data? Gosh, when we look at it year over year for the last 3 years, here's something that we're seeing, or this seems to be an anomaly, or we know because this is happening in the business, this profile is going to change, and here are some of the insights around that. So it's using spend analytics to help formulate that plan and synthesize with what we were just talking about with our category knowledge to really drive understanding about what the data is telling us. And so then going on to multi-year portfolio. So if we think about the category knowledge, we think about the spend analytics, and we've gathered all of this great information, it has to go somewhere. It has to lead to something. And it's really important to capture what that list of actions is. And the action should be, again, prioritized with resources and timing and so on around it so that you can see at all points in time, for my category, here are the activities that are flowing from it. Here are some top strategic sourcing projects that are coming, or here are cases where maybe I really need to get some contracts in place and stop kind of going rogue or being non-compliant and get some really meaningful contracts in place with a few key suppliers because I'm at risk of not having the supply that I need. And it's using a framework to really think about some of those pieces, like what is the assurance of supply that I need, what's the quality of the product that I need, and thinking about all of that in conjunction with all of the things we just talked about to really drive toward a meaningful long-term portfolio. Things will absolutely fall off the portfolio as maybe a project or a spend gets canceled or it gets put on hold, and things will come on. There is always going to be a case where, gosh, we didn't know we needed this. It was very difficult to see, but now it's coming up and we can add it to our portfolio. But if you get into that mindset of I always have a continuously evolving, growing, changing portfolio, and I can track that and see that, it becomes much easier to say, here's how we're going to hit our goals. Here's where we might have gaps. Here's where I have a ton of activity that could be happening, but I need more help to do it. And resources can be shifted around and so on to make that happen. You see the maturity piece at the top. Really when you're starting down this path, you may really not have a portfolio at all, and it may just be that you're still in react mode as project requests come up, and there's really not a centralized procurement pipeline. It might be unclear how you're going to hit your savings goals. It might just be, gosh, I'll hit my goal because it's my goal and I'll find a way to do it, but I'm not sure how it's going to happen. And or you might not have savings targets necessarily at an individual level, and so this may feel a little bit far in. All the way up to, again, at kind of a top level of maturity, that continuous multi-year portfolio is globally visible. The plans, it clearly ties to the category plans that we were talking about so that you can see this is what activity is being driven directly from my category plan. And like I mentioned, the portfolio is prioritized, resourced, there's accurate timing around it, and we all feel really confident as to how we're going to hit our goals and objectives. I think all of that ties to keeping in mind the vision that we set out for our category. So if our category is, over the next 3 years to, drive X% costs out of a given category with this level of quality and, an attention to new products that are coming onto the market and how the category feeds into that, then the portfolio should really be an accurate reflection of that, because your vision should drive down to key objectives, which drive down to meaningful strategies, and those strategies become then executable from the portfolio of projects that you're doing. And you can see then, again, a glance of what a project pipeline or a portfolio might look like, just a little bit of a snapshot to give you an example. And then so going on to execution support, you have to get things done. So you've come up with this great multi-year portfolio. You've got lots of projects going on. You need to get things done. So it's being able to see that resource picture and see, what you need to get your activities done and make sure the right work is happening by the right person. So again, at level 1, it might be that, there is, very reactively resourcing of projects. You can't really figure out, gosh, in my area I'm seeing a big uptick and I could really use some help, and it might be hard to shift things around, all the way up to, again, at a top level of maturity. There's clear roles and responsibilities. There's a definite planning process that drives resource optimization. And again, there's a very clear prioritized visibility into, what's going into a project, what the profile is, what it looks like. And a couple of just things to remember is good planning leads to that increased pipeline. No good plan that I've ever seen, kind of comes up with, nope, there's no good ideas. I think we've already done it all already. There's nothing there. Every plan that I've ever seen anyone develop or have worked on myself leads to new ideas, new what-ifs. What if we substituted a new product and did it this way? Or what if, we automated more of the process? Or what if we looked at qualifying a new supplier in this geography? So I have yet to see a plan that doesn't lead to that increased pipeline and putting those new ideas out there, either to execute on today because they're relevant and ready today, or let's start building toward in 2 years being ready to do this, or in 3 years ready to tackle this big idea. So good planning should lead to that increased pipeline, and so you have to be ready then to execute on that. It doesn't do much good if you have this great pipeline of activities, this great portfolio, and it all sits there for a long time because we just don't have the resources to execute on it. So it's thinking about what happens when the work does come in that I expect it to from my plan and getting in front of that. Delivering on your plan commitments is really important. We'll start to let down the business if they've mutually agreed with us that we have these great opportunities in front of us and then we just can't get it done. And having clear roles around who's doing what and when is that happening and what is the prioritization, and making sure everyone's agreed to that is really important to optimize results and to also make sure we're delivering on our promises. So that's why execution support becomes an important building block in our process as well. And so we've just covered an awful lot of building blocks. There are more, but these are really the 6 key building blocks that I wanted to highlight today. And hopefully this sense of maturity is resonating with everyone, in the sense of, in each of these blocks that we talked about, you are and should be at different stages, and being able to really reflect on where you are today and where you want to be. And the goal is not to always be at level 5. The goal may be that, for spend analytics, getting to a point where you're at kind of a level 3, level 4 feels really good and feels like a much better place to be than you are today. It's just having that self-assessment as an individual category manager and as an organization that I think can really drive good growth within category management. And again, as just kind of a reminder, we've covered a lot of stuff and we've done it at a very high level. Obviously, for each of these building blocks, we can go much deeper, and there are other building blocks that we can talk about. But I think it's really useful to think about category management as a journey. So even those of you who said it shapes the way that we do things and we do it in line with the business, there are absolutely things that you can be doing to kind of further go down the journey of category management and think about being better scaled or globally optimized, or, just increasing the results that it can drive, reaching deeper into the procurement life cycle to think about more procurement levers that come into play with your plan. So it's important to think about the whole journey and to realize that it is a continual journey. I don't think there's a category management nirvana that you hit and say, okay, great, now we can take it easy because we've done everything that we said we had to do. When you start to think that way, there's a really good chance that you might slide backwards a little bit on that journey and might plateau a little bit. So it's thinking about what's next in our journey, what's our vision for category management, and how do we keep going. But it's also, for those of you who are at an earlier stage of the journey, thinking about kind of the getting started block that you see here. It's building the basic pieces before you try to leap to the end of the story. It's thinking about just, let's get some basic roles in place. Let's get some basic first-time achievable but a little bit aggressive targets in place. Let's prioritize what we want to do first, second, and third. Let's get some basic tools and templates in place to help us a little bit with what we're trying to do. And it's taking that step change approach that I think can be really useful. So definitely want to leave us with that thought about category management as a journey and as a mindset that's going to continue to grow and evolve as you go forward. And we do have one more polling question. We're at the end of the actual presentation, but I thought it would be good to just kind of wrap up with a polling question to say, where are you within your category management journey? We just talked about it. Are you A, not currently on a journey within category management? B, I'm getting started, but I'm at an early stage in the journey. C, I'm already accelerating and consistently applying. I have basic concepts and I'm now doing them more consistently, frequently. Or D, I'm scaling and globally optimizing. I'm mature within category management and could be a leading example of the practice, or of leading practice. So if you could just answer that last polling question, that would be great.
All right, folks, and we do have about 20 seconds left with that poll open, so please do find that in the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen and select your answers, and we'll have those results here soon. Lynn, we do have a lot of fantastic questions in queue for you, so I was wondering if maybe you might want to take one now while we are waiting for the results to populate.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
All right, fantastic. Well, the first one that I have for you, is there a standard spend threshold or level of complexity required before it makes sense to dedicate category management resources to a specific category?
I think the answer to that is no. I think it's just how you group categories together that makes sense. So by that I mean, you want to start with your biggest impact, of course. So I wouldn't start with my smallest spend category and use that as my beginning step. But I'd pick a really high impact, interesting category and use that as my first plan. But then I would build a roadmap from there that really looks to grouping categories together and thinking about my spend in a holistic way to say, in year one, here are the categories that I'll get under plan. In year two, in year three, and here's how I'll refresh them, and here's what my continual roadmap looks like. So I think really all spend should be able to fall under a category plan. It's just what you do first, second, and third, and having, again, that roadmap point of view, I think makes that obvious over time as you build that out.
Fantastic answer. All right, we do have those poll results in. So what do you think, Lynn?
I actually am really excited to see that. I would have, if you would have asked me what I hoped to see, I would have said somewhere in the B and C range, just in terms of what I think I hear most often and where I think people are. I'm happy to see that almost all of the people who responded are on some stage of the journey, and that we're kind of accurately reflecting where we are to say, yep, I might just be getting started and that's okay. So I'm actually really thrilled to see that.
All right, fantastic. Well, we do have a lot of questions in queue, so if you'd like to, we can get right to it.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, next up, when should supplier diversity be considered during the category management process? How should category managers thoughtfully integrate supplier diversity into their action plans?
Great question. I think that when you get in the mindset of doing a category plan and you have the right, again, tools, templates, methodology in place, there's going to be a point in it, in several points actually, where you're thoughtfully considering your supplier diversity priorities and equations. So, for example, when you're doing your business requirements gathering as an internal assessment piece, and you're understanding what are your biggest priorities and what are your current supplier dynamics and so on, you should be thinking about it then, just in terms of what do we internally look like today, what are our goals, how important is diversity within this category, and is this an opportunity for that or not? And I've seen people even within their plans have, kind of supplier diversity scales where they figure out, for this category, how relevant is it, or how able are we to have, diverse suppliers brought into this given category. And then it should translate all the way down through to when you're doing your strategy and your priorities, that you actually build into some of the portfolio and the projects. If there's a particular diversity initiative that you have, or if you're looking to develop an existing diverse supplier to be a bigger part of your portfolio, it's one of the procurement portfolio activities that you're undertaking. So it should really run through the whole thread, and with a good methodology and good tools and templates, it will be a continual thought process throughout.
Great answer. All right, next in queue, do you see in most organizations procurement taking the lead in legal contract negotiations?
Good question. Yeah, so I think procurement absolutely has a role within the contract negotiation stage, and I think they obviously have a deep role in terms of serving as the conduit between, for example, the supplier and legal. I think where I usually see there's a little bit of a boundary is, for some of the more specific legal terms and conditions, either there's a playbook in place, a legal playbook where procurement knows, okay, here's my fallback plan, here's, some alternate language I can use and so on, and kind of gets it to that point. Or if there's not a legal playbook in place, kind of just being that conduit again, back and forth to legal, so that ultimately if there's a legal implication, the appropriate people are making that decision. But again, I'd recommend, a legal playbook or something like that can give procurement a bigger role with respect to the legal negotiation pieces.
Perfect. All right, well, we do have about 10 more minutes that we can take questions, so I do want to encourage the audience members, if you have any questions, please do submit those in the Q&A box there on your WebEx screen, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. All right, Lynn, your next question. My organization has no category plans or management here. How can we start this process?
Great question. I love that question. I think there are two pieces. One, if you're in an individual category manager role today, certainly, helping to influence, your procurement leadership to think about that and think about some of the pieces we talked about. Hopefully the slides kind of help jog your memory and kind of keep that fresh in your mind, and kind of influencing. I think there's a lot of benefit to doing this. Can be one individual step you can take. As an individual category manager, you can also just start doing some of the things we talked about. Just because it's not a procurement mandate right now doesn't mean you can't go have deeper relationships with your stakeholders. It doesn't mean you can't get better at, how you analyze your spend or build a portfolio in conjunction with your stakeholders. So there are individual things, and we've tried to structure today's discussion in terms of there are individual things that you can do right now. If you're a procurement leader and you're asking that question, I definitely think it's really going deeper into understanding what can category management do for me, and what are the pieces that I need in order to make it successful, going back to some of that direction setting and enablers and work processes that we talked about at the beginning, and building a plan and a vision for category management. Just, not just kind of diving into the deep end and hoping for the best, but really taking a thoughtful approach to putting together what could that look like, and how do I make it happen? How do I make the change happen? And you oftentimes need some help with that, but it's having a deliberate approach to it that becomes very important.
All right, that is a fantastic answer. Thank you so much for that. All right, more questions in queue. Next up, where do you recommend that we store and collaborate on our category plans?
I think the key to it is making sure it's easy to find, and it is a collaborative space, or it's a shared drive, or if there's an intranet site, or however you manage, shared documents internally. You want it to be a couple things. First of all, you want it to be a plan that, it sounds a little bit procedural, but that is an approved plan. So, it's not just a plan that procurement creates and sits somewhere and hopes for the best. It's a plan that the business essentially signs off on and is, again, a collaborator in, that kind of says, yep, this is the plan and we've stacked hands on it. You may even have a step where procurement and or business leadership signs off on it as well. And again, typically there's some sort of governance like a category council or something that helps to oversee it. But you have to store it somewhere where you can reference it, you can look at it, you can live it. You really shouldn't just, again, create it and then revisit it in a year or two. So having it where you can see it and hopefully globally see it. If you're a global organization, that everyone across regions can access it, even if it's just a North American plan or even if it's just a European plan, you can access it and see and make it relevant for your own region. I think that's the couple best pieces of advice I can offer. So do what's best for your organization based on how you consume information, but make it easy to find, make it referenceable, make it something you go into and actually live.
Great, and that's perfect advice for that situation. All right, and next up, I love this question. How do you manage creating strategic, innovative category strategies when your company is more focused on short-term savings?
Wow, that is a good question. There's probably a really, really long answer to it, but I'll keep it short. I think you have to just start finding ways to break the mindset, and how that works at each organization might be a little bit different, but it can start with, if you have a stakeholder you have a really good relationship with, just having the direct conversation with them going, let's change the game, let's do it differently, let's build a longer term mindset. It doesn't mean you're not going to be getting savings in the short term also, but while we're doing that, let's also make sure it tracks us toward a much bigger, multi-year picture, and that we're doing thoughtful things that can lead to even bigger things down the road, because something that feels long term right now is eventually going to become your short term down the road, and you want to make sure you're set for maximizing the success then, and not just kind of waiting until you get there to think about it. So I think, again, there's 1,000 different thoughts going through my head, but it's as simple as, yes, I'm doing the short term, but I'm also, kind of throwing out there, here are the 5 things we should do in the future, or here are the ways this folds into a few other categories that we're thinking about, and we should really look at putting a plan together that combines all of that. So just the little things that you can do now, and again, leveraging a really friendly stakeholder, or leveraging a category where the spend inside and out, can really help get a leg up on just trying to change the game one step at a time.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Lynn. Well, I think we have enough time for one more question, and I'm going to go with this one. With the increasing growth of analytical firepower, are you seeing more metrics baked into the contracts? And they gave a couple of examples: compliance metrics, pricing tiers, performance stipulations, etc.
I think across the board, be it embedded in contracts or just the performance of your category or the performance of a supplier relationship, I think metrics are becoming more and more important. I think we are becoming more and more focused on what are the analytics telling us and how do we drive insights from that. So yes, I think the answer is yes. I think that said, I'm realistic to say I oftentimes talk to people who don't even have contracts in place in some categories in some areas yet. So it's where you do have contracts, yes, I do think getting the right KPIs in place and measuring that and having a two-way street relationship with your suppliers and really having an effective supplier management strategy to make that as meaningful as possible is something I see more and more organizations moving to or wanting to move to, and that all should be a factor in your category plan. You should think through, once I get these suppliers in place and once I get the right contract terms in place with the right metrics, how do I actually have the conversation around that? How do I actually have a meaningful supplier management strategy and relationship? So I think the answer is yes, but it's not just what lies in the contracts, it's how we live that throughout and how we think about the strategy around it.
Fantastic. All right, well, I do think we have time for one more question if you promise to try to answer it quickly. So I'm going to go
I'll do
ahead
my
and
best.
get into that one now. Okay, perfect. How can we better stay in the market as part of a category management strategy?
I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'd say just, again, live it. Have a very deliberate plan for here are the network of peers I'm going to talk to and how often I'm going to talk to them. Here's the extra 5 minutes I'm going to take with my top suppliers to really pick their brain or have them, come talk to us about innovation or continuous improvement. It's just opening the doors to all of the channels, not just here are the couple subscriptions that I have or, here are my one or two go-to things. And looking at category knowledge as multifaceted and something you should just continue to do, not just, every time you might have a sourcing project or every time you might have an activity that comes up. So there's a lot more we could go into there, but in the spirit of keeping it short, those are a couple of my thoughts.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you for such a fantastic and informative webinar here today. We're certainly looking forward to having you back on the SIG webinar series very soon. We are now pushing out the slides. They're on your screen. So if you click on that link in that box, you can click on the link and download the presentation straight to your desktop. We will see all of you back here on Tuesday, November 14th for the next webinar with Barreau discussing AI and machine learning. So we hope that you will join us for that. And to any veterans listening on the line today, we here at SIG just want to thank you for your service and wish you a happy Veterans Day. So have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you to Denali and Lynn, and see you next Tuesday's webinar.